When Marcus and Michael Thompson first stepped into the Warriors Path Karate Dojo, they weren't just newcomers, they were outsiders. In the brightly lit room, thick with the scent of sweat and labored breathing, where nearly every student was white, the presence of two black boys brought a sudden, uneasy silence. No one said a word, but the looks were loud enough. Do these kids really belong here? The 14-year-old twins walked in sync, as if bound by an invisible thread that tied their thoughts together. They wore crisp white uniforms and brand-new yellow belts. But those belts might as well have been neon signs hanging from their necks. I'm a rookie, I'm an easy target, and from that very first training session, two names quickly emerged like shadows in a bad dream: Jake Harrison and Connor Mills. Veteran black belts with eyes sharp as blades and egos even bigger than their bulging muscles. They didn't need time to sniff out new prey. Marcus and Michael became entertainment, targets for mockery, smirks, and the kind of looks that treated them like aliens from another planet. And one day, the insults crossed the line from rude to outright vicious. During warm-ups, Jake sneered and muttered, "Didn't know monkeys could learn human moves." The room froze. No one spoke, but everyone heard. Marcus clenched his fist so tight his knuckles turned white. Michael placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, a light touch but strong enough to anchor him in reason. They didn't respond, didn't lash out, didn't clap back, not because they were afraid, but because they understood. The real battle wasn't here. That night, in their family's small garage, the soft yellow light cast shadows of three figures. Their father, Darnell Thompson, a former U.S. Special Forces soldier, was teaching his sons the techniques he had once learned, used, and survived by. Victory doesn't come from the first punch, but from how you rise after the last one, he said, adjusting Michael's stance. Night after night, while the world slept, the trio trained in silence. The sound of knees hitting the mat, deep breathing, fists striking the heavy bag, it all echoed like a quiet vow. No one saw, no one knew, but every drop of sweat, every bruise was proof of something growing in the shadows, true strength. What do you think about how Marcus and Michael responded? If it were you, would you stay silent and grow, or fight back immediately? Drop a comment. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And remember, this is just the beginning. The stage is set for a rising tension. More confrontations, the quiet rise of the brothers, and ultimately an unstoppable reckoning. Jake Harrison's mocking voice returned, but this time it felt like a needle stabbing Marcus's pride. "Look at you two, like monkeys trying to act human." That wasn't just an insult. It was a psychological attack, and worse, delivered with a twisted sense of pleasure. Connor Mills laughed beside him, then added in a low voice, "Maybe we should throw them a few bananas. Might help them learn faster." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the chest. His shoulders trembled. At the same time, Michael, barely a few feet away, seemed to fold slightly. Their synchronized reactions weren't coincidence. It was twin intuition, like a song played without a conductor still staying perfectly in rhythm. A few other students glanced toward them, then quickly looked away, as if witnessing the humiliation made them feel guilty but not brave enough to act. Just steps away, Sensei Mitchell continued the lesson, eyes locked on his instructions. "Keep your back straight, yellow belts. Strength starts with a solid base." Did he hear it? Yes, but he did nothing, and that hurt more than Jake's words. Michael clenched his fists, knuckles white and trembling, not from fear, but fury. Marcus felt the emotion crash over him like a wave. They had shared pain before, grown through the same struggles, but being publicly degraded in front of dozens of people, this was new. "Time for sparring," Sensei Mitchell clapped twice, breaking the heavy tension. "Pair up with someone at your level." Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his pants and scanned the room for another yellow belt. But it was too late. Jake Harrison was already walking toward them, his steps light like a predator stalking its prey, eyes lit with the smug smile of a hunter. "New meat," Jake said, loud enough for his friend to hear. "Let's see what they got." Michael stepped back slightly, voice low but firm. "We're supposed to pair with people at our level." Connor joined the group from behind, arms crossed, black belt a stark contrast against his white uniform. "Don't worry, we'll show you some real techniques," he smirked. "Unless you'd prefer sticking to street tricks." The words sounded casual but dripped with racist undertones. In that moment, Marcus could barely see the face in front of him, everything blurred under the flood of rising anger. He stepped forward, but Michael was faster, laying a hand on his brother's arm to hold him back. They understood each other without saying a word. "Bow to your sparring partner," Sensei Mitchell called out from the far end of the room. Marcus stood across from Connor. Michael faced Jake. They exchanged a glance. Just a second, enough to say everything with their eyes. "Stay calm, be patient, don't react, survive. Go light," Sensei reminded them. "This drill is for technique, not power." The sparring began, and so did the nightmare. Connor's first kick, which should have been controlled, landed squarely on Marcus's ribs with enough force to knock the air out of his lungs. Marcus staggered, trying to stay on his feet, but his inexperienced legs couldn't hold him. He fell backward, coughing hard as Connor feigned concern. "Oops, sorry. Guess yellow belts were weaker than I thought." On the adjacent mat, Michael wasn't faring any better. Jake's so-called light punches were as sharp and precise as needles, not enough to break skin, but enough to bruise both flesh and pride. When Michael tried to counter with a basic combo the twins had just learned, Jake batted it away like it was child's play. In a flash, he swept Michael's legs with cold, surgical precision, sending him crashing to the mat with a heavy thud. Jake didn't offer a hand to help him up, just smirked and said, "Stay down. That's where you belong." Michael struggled to rise, his face caught between humiliation and rising rage. His eyes burned, not with tears, but with fire. The fire of someone being pushed to the edge. A few steps away, Marcus felt that sting as if it hit him directly. He didn't need to look, he knew exactly what Michael was feeling. Born at the same time, but every time one was hurt, the other felt it too. The sparring lasted another 10 minutes, a public beating disguised as technical training. The twins became human punching bags for two black belts. Every strike, every fall left its mark. Yet Jake and Connor kept up the act of mentorship. Smooth words paired with punishing blows. Sensei Mitchell, just a short distance away, kept focusing on the other students, as if the two black boys being brutalized right in front of him didn't even exist. "Maybe your dad should have signed you up for basketball," Connor panted, driving a careless elbow into Marcus's shoulder. "Stick to the stuff your kind's good at." Marcus tasted blood in his mouth. His lip was split, swollen, but he clenched his jaw and replied through his teeth, "We're not quitting." Jake gave a short, dry laugh, pulling Michael up from a takedown that wouldn't be out of place in a UFC match. "We'll see about that. This dojo has standards." When class ended, the brothers packed their gear in silence. No words, just the sound of limping footsteps, sore shoulders, and bruised lips. Their yellow belts seemed less like signs of progress and more like targets. Everyone could see them, and everyone chose to ignore them. Around the room, the other students avoided eye contact. Some fiddled with their belts, others turned and walked away quickly. The air felt heavy, like lead. "Good work today," Sensei Mitchell announced to the class, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. "Remember, martial arts teaches us discipline and respect." The words echoed in Marcus and Miku's heads like a cruel joke. Respect? Discipline? Not one adult in the room had done the right thing. As they walked toward the door, Marcus caught snippets of Jake and Connor talking near the weapons rack, whispering, "And they won't last a month." Then another voice, "Bet their dad's in prison. They belong in their own neighborhoods anyway." Michael froze. Marcus felt the air around him turn cold. Part of him wanted to turn back, not to fight, but to scream, to rip through the fake smiles and polite silence that blanketed the dojo. But then, the familiar growl of a diesel engine rumbled outside. Their father's silver grab pickup truck had just pulled into the lot. Both boys immediately tried to straighten up, masks of calm slipping over their battered faces. But bruises, limps, and a busted lip couldn't be hidden. David Thompson stepped out of the truck. Broad shoulders, strong frame, hands calloused from construction work, and a past that included 8 years in the military before becoming a full-time father. He took in everything with a single glance. 2 sons standing stiffly, moving carefully, pretending nothing was wrong, while avoiding eye contact. "How is class?" His voice was deep, not loud, but powerful enough to command stillness. "It was fine," they answered in unison. Even in pain, their twin bond remained unshaken. David stood there for a long moment, eyes resting on Marcus's split lip, then on Michael's bruised arm. He took a deep breath. The world seemed to pause as he made a silent decision. "Did you learn anything?" David Thompson asked once they were all in the truck, the glow of streetlights flashing across his sons' faces. Marcus glanced at Michael, then back ahead, his voice calmer than the truth. "Yeah, we learned a lot." 3 weeks passed, and what they learned had nothing to do with the official martial arts curriculum. They learned how to hide pain after each fall, how to swallow anger without letting it explode, and how to stand back up even when their bodies were breaking down. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they came to the dojo with fresh resolve and left with fresh bruises. By week 6, Sensei Mitchell made an announcement. "Today we're switching partners. Advanced students will assist the newcomers with sparring technique." It was a simple sentence, but to Marcus, it sounded like a warning siren. His stomach twisted as Jake Harrison locked eyes with him. That predator's grin, now as familiar as his own shadow, spread across Jake's face. Connor Mills clapped his buddy on the shoulder, speaking just loud enough for nearby students to hear. Christmas came early. Got ourselves a new target. The session began like a normal instructional class. Jake slowly demonstrated defensive techniques with Michael, his voice calm, his demeanor polished. Like the perfect model coach, any parents watching through the glass would likely be reassured. "Watch how I position my hands here," Jake said patiently. "Now you try." Michael followed the move, sharp and precise. Jake nodded in approval, but a second later his next strike, fast as lightning, slipped through Michael's guard and landed squarely in the solar plexus. Michael collapsed, gasping for breath. "You dropped your hands too early," Jake said, bending down with faux concern. "In a real fight, hesitation like that gets you hurt." Marcus jerked forward, ready to step in, but Connor moved in fast, placing a hand on his shoulder to hold him back. "Let your brother learn for himself. Or do you think he's too weak for real training?" The challenge was laced with sugar, but Marcus understood exactly what it meant. If he backed down, he'd be abandoning Michael. But if he accepted, he'd be stepping into Connor Mills' version of carefully calculated abuse. "Go ahead," Marcus said, steadier than he felt. "I can take it." Connor grinned, eyes lighting up like a predator spotting wounded prey. "Good. Let's run through a technique combo." What followed wasn't training. It was a choreographed symphony of pain, dressed up as technical practice. Connor struck harder than necessary, sweeping Marcus off his feet with precise, aggressive leg kicks, shoulder checks, and shoves. Every time Marcus got back up, he was met with another lesson in control. "You're being too aggressive," Connor said after knocking Marcus down again. "Guys like you always think strength is the answer. But martial arts isn't about power. It's about control." His tone was light, even polite, but everyone knew what he meant. There were no outright insults, just a razor disguised as a feather. It cut deep without drawing blood. Marcus lay on the mat, fists clenched. Rage surged like a tidal wave. But the memory of Michael's eyes, of those quiet nights training with their dad, and the words, "A true warrior knows when to fight and when to wait," held him back. Across the room, Michael was fighting his own war. Jake had dropped all pretenses. Every lesson was now a thinly veiled attack. Whenever Michael stood, barely catching his breath, Jake would sweep his legs with a move Sensei had explicitly said was for free sparring only. Michael hit the mat over and over, like his body was nothing more than a punching bag in a gi. "Maybe you should pick a different sport," Jake said casually as he pulled Michael up by the arm. "Something more natural for you. Basketball maybe, or track?" Michael gasped for air, barely able to stay on his feet. "I'm not quitting." Just 5 words, but enough for Jake to nod, as if he'd been given the green light for the next lesson. And the torment continued. At the front of the dojo, Sensei Mitchell watched from behind the front desk. His face was expressionless, but his eyes betrayed a quiet satisfaction. When a parent, a student's mother, asked about the intensity of the training, he smiled and explained, "Traditional martial arts isn't for everyone. We build character by putting students through adversity." Another boy had asked to switch partners after the last session. Sensei had calmly replied, "We have standards here, and those standards don't change for personal feelings." That evening, inside their dad's pickup, the brothers sat in silence, holding ice packs against fresh injuries. No words were needed. They understood each other with every breath. "We'll figure it out soon," Michael said softly, repositioning the ice over his bruised ribs. "We told him we were learning," Marcus replied. "That's not a lie." "Learning what? How to accept we don't belong?" Marcus turned and looked at his brother. A mirror image of himself, yet facing pain in a completely different way. Marcus lashed out. Michael held it in, letting it eat at him like acid. "We belong wherever we decide to belong," Marcus said firmly. "No one else gets to decide that for us." Michael gave a bitter laugh. "Tell that to my cracked ribs." 2 days later, David Thompson, a father who had always believed in letting his sons fight their own battles, made an unexpected decision. That day, their father didn't stop the truck at the dojo entrance like usual. Instead, he turned off the engine, stepped out, opened the back door, and said, "I'll be coming in to watch class today." The brothers exchanged a quick, anxious glance. They were so used to facing things alone that their dad's presence felt unfamiliar. But the moment he stepped inside the dojo, the atmosphere shifted. His solid frame and military bearing, he didn't need to say much. His presence alone was enough to command attention. Sensei Mitchell approached with a polished smile. "It's always great to see a parent taking interest in their child's training. I always take an interest in my son's learning," David replied calmly, though his eyes were scanning the room with the instinct of a former squad leader. That class was different. Jake and Connor still played the roles of senior students, but their behavior had been calibrated, subtly toned down. The sarcastic remarks remained, but were now wrapped in layers of politeness. After slamming Michael to the mat with a hard throw, Jake helped him up and smiled. "You're improving. I'm sure your dad's proud seeing how well you're adapting to this environment." From a distance, David heard only a compliment. But within that word, adapting, Michael caught the message loud and clear. "You don't belong here, but if you play along, we might let you stay." Connor wasn't far behind. When Marcus slipped after a hard shove, he helped him up and said, "Nice. You're learning to listen. You're starting to figure out your place in the system." The system, a word that sounded harmless, but carried an entire hidden hierarchy the brothers were never truly invited into. At the end of class, David walked over to Sensei. "The boys are working hard. I hope they'll continue to improve." Sensei Mitchell nodded. "They have talent, but martial arts isn't just about physical strength. It's about learning to integrate into an environment of discipline and structure. With the right guidance, I'm confident they'll find the level that suits them." The phrase "level that suits them" slid past David's ears like a casual observation. But to Marcus and Michael, it landed like a cold blade, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they implied. "You can try, but you'll never be equal to us." On the drive home, David Thompson seemed genuinely satisfied. "Looks like you boys are getting some proper training," he said, eyes on the road. "Mr. Mitchell runs a tight program." "Yes, sir," the brothers answered in unison, like a pair of automatic responses. But this time, that familiar harmony wasn't a sign of their bond. It was a shared mask hiding the bitter truth. Those older students seem like good kids. It's great to see experienced ones stepping up to mentor the new guys. Marcus turned his face toward the window, watching the familiar streets blur past like a film in reverse. In the world their father had just described, everything made sense. Guidance replaced violence. Care replaced mockery. Michael, sitting in the back seat, answered softly, "They've taught us a lot." And that was true. Just not the kind of lessons found in a karate curriculum. They were learning the unspoken rules of power and silence, about subtle racism, about how adults could ignore violence if it came packaged in discipline and tradition, about how it feels to be completely alone in a crowded room. "I'm glad to hear that," David smiled as they pulled into the driveway. "Martial arts builds character. It prepares you for anything life throws at you." As they pulled their gear bags from the truck, the cabin light briefly caught their eyes, meeting. No words were needed. They understood. They were facing life all right, just not the way their father imagined. That night, in the bedroom they'd shared since they were little, the 14-year-old twins finally broke the silence with a real conversation. "This isn't going to get better," Michael whispered in the dark. "I know. What if we just told Dad the truth?" Marcus hesitated. Their father had taught them that a man solves his own problems, doesn't run from hardship, and that respect has to be earned. How could he explain that the very system they were in was rigged from the start? "I wouldn't believe us," Marcus said after a long pause. "He's seen it all. Mitchell, Jake, Connor, it all looks normal, because that's exactly how they want it to look." "Exactly, and if we complain, we'll be seen as weak, like we can't handle real training." Michael was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he'd fallen asleep. But then his voice came through the dark, clear, calm, and sharper than ever. "And then we need to get stronger. Strong enough that no one can touch us again." "But how? They're black belts. We just got our yellow." "I don't know yet. But there has to be a way." Outside the window, the street glowed quietly under warm yellow lights, the calm picture of the American dream their parents had worked so hard to build. But inside that room, two kids were learning how to survive a war the adults couldn't see, and the ones in power refused to admit even existed. Tuesday morning, week 8, began like any other. Marcus and Michael quietly packed their gis and gear, while their father, David, downed a rushed cup of coffee in the kitchen. The extra hours on a commercial project had left deep circles under his eyes, but he still smiled as he wished his sons a good day. He didn't know that the toughest battle his boys would face today wasn't on a construction site. It was right in the middle of the dojo mat. "You want me to come pick you up after class?" David asked, glancing at the time. "My meeting with the electrical contractor should wrap up earlier than planned." "We can walk home," Marcus said quickly, almost by reflex. The last thing they needed was their dad accidentally witnessing another one of Jake and Connor's training sessions. "It's dark early these days," David frowned. "I don't mind coming back." "Seriously, Dad, we're good," Michael chimed in, trying to sound casual. "Cool air after training helps us cool down anyway." David paused for a moment, as if studying their eyes, then nodded. "All right, but call me if anything comes up." That evening, class started like usual with basic kata drills. Though only yellow belts, Marcus and Michael had made noticeable progress thanks to hours of at-home training and online tutorials. Their moves were cleaner, more powerful. But kata wasn't where the real pain started. "Time to move into partner drills," Sensei Mitchell announced. "Today, we'll work on defending against multiple attackers." A drill meant for advanced students. And yet, by coincidence, the two selected to demonstrate were Marcus and Michael, their assigned volunteer instructors, Jake and Connor. No one questioned it. No one protested. "The key is to keep moving," Jake said as he began circling the twins, When you're outnumbered, staying still makes you a target. What followed wasn't instruction. It was sanctioned punishment. Under the guise of realistic scenario training, Jake and Connor took turns striking, sweeping, kicking, and shoving. Every blow targeted weaknesses. Every time Marcus tried to help his brother, he was blocked with a knee to the gut that folded him in half. "Take note," Jake called out to the class, grinning like a teacher mid-lesson. "You can't help your teammate if you're on the floor yourself." Connor swept Michael off his feet and turned to the class. "See that? Instinctive reactions often backfire. Martial arts isn't about instinct." The exercise dragged on for 15 minutes. Every second a nightmare. If one tried to get up, the other got hit. No one stood tall, no one caught a breath, and no one stepped in. "Some people just aren't cut out for this kind of training," Jake said smugly, helping Michael up with a grip so tight it left finger-shaped bruises. When the session finally ended, the brothers got to their feet out of sheer muscle memory, shoulders heavy, lips split, arms trembling. But not a single tear fell. Only silence remained, and silence is what bullies hate most. What they didn't expect was the familiar silver pickup truck waiting outside in the parking lot. David Thompson had wrapped up his meeting early and decided to surprise his boys with a ride home. From outside the dojo's glass wall, he saw his sons hadn't come out yet, but he did see Jake and Connor near the weapons rack, laughing with a few other students. "Did you see how fast those two dropped?" Connor laughed loudly. "Like they've never thrown a punch in their lives," Jake snorted. "Probably learned everything they know from street fights." No technique, no discipline. Just swinging wild like animals. That last line froze David's blood in his veins. He understood. There was no room left for doubt. And just then, his two sons walked out of the dojo. Under the dim yellow glow of the parking lot lights, their injuries became painfully clear. Marcus's lip was split and swollen, and the shoulder of his gi was torn. Michael limped slightly, one hand clutching his side. There was nothing left to hide. Michael stepped out of the dojo with the careful gait of someone trying to keep his bruised bones in place. His shoulder slumped, arm wrapped around his ribs. Every movement radiated silent pain. David Thompson needed only one look. His instincts as a former soldier kicked in immediately. He'd seen young soldiers return from the battlefield, their eyes revealing more than their mouths ever could. And now, that same haunted look lived in his 14-year-old son's eyes. "Get in the truck," David said quietly, his voice low and cold like tempered steel. No one argued. The ride home was silent. Under the harsh kitchen lights, the truth spilled out without a single word. Bruises, split lips, scraped arms. A battlefield report his boys had been hiding for 8 long weeks. "How long has this been going on?" David asked. The question fired off like a command. "Dad, it's not," Marcus started to explain. "How long?" David's voice shifted into command mode. "No room for deflection." "Since the first class," Michael said softly. The floodgates opened, the story spilled out. 8 weeks of systematic bullying, covert racism, and betrayal by a teacher their father once trusted. "Mitchell knew?" David asked, his eyes locked on Marcus. "Was standing right there," Marcus replied. "But when you showed up, they staged everything perfectly." David walked to the window, standing still. Reflected in the glass was the face of a father now facing a decision that would redefine his family and his own sense of honor. "So what do we do now?" Michael asked, his voice quiet but firm. David didn't answer right away. He took a long breath, closed his eyes, summoning all the instincts of a soldier now repurposed for his children. "We give them one chance to make this right. I'm meeting with Mitchell tomorrow." "What if he doesn't listen?" Marcus asked. David turned, eyes dark and cold in a way neither of them had seen before. "Then we handled it ourselves." That night, David pulled an old heavy bag and a pair of worn training gloves from the garage. Gear he had packed away after his discharge, now brought out, not for combat overseas, but to train 2 young warriors, so they would never have to bow their heads again. The next afternoon, David walked into Warrior's Path with the stride of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. He wasn't there as a polite parent anymore. He was a father who no longer trusted the system. Sensei Mitchell looked up from behind the front desk, managing a stiff smile. His expression shifted from surprise to unease in an instant. "Mr. Thompson, how can I help you?" "We need to talk about my sons and what's been happening here." Mitchell hesitated briefly, then gestured toward the office with forced composure. "Of course. Please, step inside." As the two men walked toward the back, Jake and Connor, mid-warm-up, looked up. Their expressions changed instantly, smugness giving way to tension. They knew the game had changed. Inside the small office behind the counter, David scanned the room. Awards, tournament photos, inspirational quotes. Everything arranged to evoke tradition, discipline, and honor. But he knew better. Deception hides best when it wears the mask of virtue. "Please, have a seat," Mitchell said, settling behind the desk. His tone carried the confidence of someone used to handling difficult parents. David remained standing. His solid, weathered frame made the office feel smaller. The air thickened. "My sons have been assaulted in this dojo for 2 months. Systematically, intentionally, with clear racial overtones. By 2 black belt students you assigned to mentor the beginners." Mitchell's face shifted from guarded to performative. "Mr. Thompson, I understand that training can be a bit intense for new students. But what you're describing, that's not reflective of our program here. Have you ever seen an adult use false calm to mask guilt? Do you believe that sometimes tradition is just a shield for injustice? Share your thoughts. Because sometimes silence is complicity. Jake Harrison and Connor Mills have been using my sons as punching bags for the past 2 months, David continued, his voice steady but cold as forged steel, right in front of the other students, under your supervision, and you did nothing to stop it. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, slipping into the role of the falsely accused. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Thompson. Jake and Connor are model students from well-respected families. That line didn't pass David's ears as some throwaway remark. Well-respected families. He knew exactly what that really meant. What are you implying? That my sons are lying? I'm simply saying teenagers sometimes mistake firm instruction for bullying. Traditional martial arts can be intense. Not everyone is cut out for it. David's hands clenched. The veins stood out against the callous skin of a man who spent decades on construction sites. Last night I heard your so-called model students refer to my sons as animals. Mocked them for not belonging at a dojo built for something other than street fighting. You call that firm instruction? Mitchell hesitated. His expression didn't shift much, but the certainty in his eyes wavered. I wasn't aware of any inappropriate language. If something was said, you were standing less than 10 feet away, David cut in, voice sharp as a blade. Don't insult my intelligence. The air froze. Mitchell cleared his throat, flipping through a few papers on the desk, as if looking for a way out. Perhaps we can find a resolution that works for all parties, he said cautiously. The Harrison and Mills families have contributed significantly to this dojo. Their support allows us to operate and provide scholarships for other students. David narrowed his eyes. So you're protecting their sons because their parents pay you? I'm maintaining a delicate balance, one that benefits the entire dojo community. Your sons are bright boys, but maybe this environment isn't the right fit for their circumstances. David stepped closer to the desk. His voice dropped, but every word hit like a silent punch. Circumstances? You mean because they're black? I meant they're new to the discipline expected in a traditional setting. Some students adapt better to a strict structure while others... Strict structure? David interrupted, his eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. So, in your dictionary, 2 black belts beating on yellow belts right in front of you qualifies as structure? Mitchell rose from his chair, no longer able to maintain composure. I've run this dojo for 15 years. I know the difference between tough training and abuse. My sons aren't struggling with the curriculum, David shot back. They were targeted, abused, humiliated. And you You stood there and watched. Mitchell's jaw tensed. Then maybe this place isn't the right fit for your boys. That sentence hit the room like a thrown gauntlet. Part dismissal, part challenge. David locked eyes with him. In that moment, he saw what he had refused to admit for weeks. This wasn't a personal misunderstanding. This was a system propped up by silence, power, and money. So what's your solution? David asked, voice low but unwavering. You expect my kids to walk away quietly while you keep collecting checks from parents who raise racists and let their sons keep intimidating anyone who doesn't fit your ideal student mold? I'm trying to find a reasonable path through a complex situation, Mitchell replied, now clearly on the defensive. David turned toward the door but paused. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and final, like the click of a safety coming off. You have until tomorrow night to fix this. Reassign those two to another class. Discipline them publicly. Make it crystal clear. The harassment stops now. However you need to make that happen. Mitchell squinted. And if I don't? David turned back, offering a smile, sharp and frozen as a winter wind. Then I'll handle it, my way. Outside the office, the evening class had just begun. Through the open door, David saw his sons warming up with the other students. Their movements were still stiff from the previous day's injuries, but their eyes stayed sharp, focused. Across the room, Jake and Connor looked relaxed, confident, even smug. They had no idea. Tonight marked the beginning of something they couldn't undo. In his office, Sensei Mitchell sank heavily into his chair. His mind raced. The Harrison and Mills families accounted for over 30% of the dojo's income, through tuition, private sessions, and equipment sales. Losing them could mean cutting programs, laying off assistant instructors, maybe even closing the dojo altogether. But David Thompson's eyes didn't belong to a man making idle threats. They belonged to a father who would do whatever it took to protect his children. At home, Marcus and Michael sat at the kitchen table doing homework, though their eyes kept flicking toward the clock. Each minute ticked by like a needle jabbing at their chests. What do you think Dad's saying to him right now? Michael asked, tapping his pencil against his math book. Non-stop. Whatever needs to be said, Marcus replied. Though his voice was taut like a drawn bow, his fingers gripped the pencil as if ready to snap it in half. What if it makes everything worse? Marcus looked up from his history assignment, eyes glowing with intensity. Worse! They're already trying to break us. Well, maybe they can. Or maybe they'll kick us out. And honestly, that might be easier. Michael stared at his brother. Even as twins, there were times he couldn't quite understand Marcus's readiness to burn every bridge if it meant standing his ground. You want to quit? No. I want to be somewhere we're not treated like trash. But I also want to prove we can belong anywhere we choose, even if those two things don't line up. Michael nodded slightly. Then we'll make both things true. The front door opened. Both boys looked up. Their father stepped inside, his face unreadable, shoulders straighter than usual, the posture of a man who'd walked through war and was preparing to enter another one. Did you talk to him? Marcus asked. David hung the keys on the hook and sat down at the table. Mitchell cares more about the wallets of certain parents than the kids in his class. He pretty much admitted everything, and he's not planning to change a thing. So what now? Michael asked, voice quiet but clear. David looked at each of his sons. In their eyes he saw pieces of himself, but something even stronger, a blend of his unshakable will and their mother's uncompromising sense of right and wrong. Now, we prepare for what happens when words stop working. What do you mean? Marcus asked, though deep down he already knew. I mean, if the system won't protect you, then I'll teach you how to protect yourselves. A chill ran down Michael's spine. Not just fear, but a strange, electric anticipation. You mean fighting back? David was silent for a moment. Then, in a calm, even voice, he said, I'm talking about survival, about making sure no one lays a hand on you again without paying the price. That night, David cleared out the garage, once his small woodworking shop, and hung up the old heavy bag he'd pulled from the back shed. The twins stood by silently, watching as their father transformed the bare space into something that carried the energy of a real dojo, but this time one rooted in truth, not the performance they'd been forced to endure each day. "Your mom doesn't need to know about this just yet," David said as he tightened the heavy bag's hook. "We'll keep it quiet until we see what happens at the dojo." "So what are you going to teach us?" Marcus asked, eyes lit not just with curiosity, but something deeper. "Hope," David smiled. Not a warm smile, not a fatherly smile, but the grim smile of a man who'd survived battlefields. "Everything I learned in 8 years of combat," he said. "Stuff those polished dojos would never teach you. Skills for surviving, not for winning medals." "Is this even legal?" Michael asked softly, sincerely. "Self-defense is always legal," David replied. "And after what I saw today, after what they've done to you, anything you do to protect yourselves is justified." The brothers looked at each other. Just one glance, no words, and all the emotions were exchanged. This was something the dojo had never offered them: agency. The right to defend, the right to exist. "Where do we start?" Marcus asked. "Right now," David said, pulling a pair of worn training gloves from his bag. "Tomorrow's Mitchell's deadline. If he doesn't act—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. By 10 p.m., their garage was no longer a place for drills and power tools. It had become the silent battleground for those the system had tried to discard, who now chose to rise anyway. David had moved the pickup truck into the yard and cleared out the garage. The heavy bag swayed slightly in the cool night breeze. Under the dim yellow light, the first drops of sweat from a new chapter glistened. "First lesson," David said as he wrapped his hands in thick cloth. "Everything they taught you at that dojo, from your stance to your katas, it's all designed to make you predictable. And when you're predictable, you're easy to take down." Marcus and Michael were still in their school uniforms, standing quietly. They didn't know exactly what their father was about to teach, but they knew this wasn't karate anymore. This was survival. "Dad, we don't want to hurt anyone," Michael said carefully. David let out a quiet laugh, not out of humor but bitterness. "Son, they've been hurting you for 2 months. This isn't about starting a fight. It's about ending one before it consumes you." He lowered his stance, raised his hands. Not in any form they'd seen before. It was lower, more agile, ready to strike, not defend. In the military, we didn't have time for flair. Just 2 things: strike and move. That's what I'm teaching you. For the next hour, David trained them like special forces. Fast, precise, targeting vulnerabilities. No pretend sparring, no tournament rules, no clean technique. Only finish the threat. "Hit the uppercut, the throat, the knees," David instructed, holding up the pad as Marcus threw his punches. "Forget looking good. Focus on making sure they can't keep coming." The boys adapted faster than David expected. All their foundational training from the dojo gave them control, but now they were learning the difference between being a trained victim and a real defender. "Where Connor grabs your wrist again," David said, pointing at Marcus, "don't pull away. Step in and hit him where it counts." "What if we get in trouble?" Michael asked, still hesitant. David raised an eyebrow. "Defending yourself against kids with a history of bullying you? Let them try. Let them explain that to your mother." Meanwhile, across town, the Harrison family sat around the dinner table beneath a warm chandelier glow. The conversation revolved around a familiar subject: Jake's martial arts achievements, a source of pride that Richard Harrison never failed to mention during these formal meals. Richard, a successful insurance executive, sliced into his steak, still smiling. "Sensei Mitchell mentioned things have gotten a little tense at the dojo lately. Cultural friction affecting the training environment." Jake nodded calmly. "There are these twin brothers who joined a few months ago. They're having a hard time adjusting, not used to discipline." "How so?" his mother asked, setting her spoon down. "They get frustrated a lot, don't show much respect for authority. Mitchell's trying to help them, but I don't think they're a good fit for traditional martial arts. Richard sighed, shaking his head. That's unfortunate, but not everyone's meant for the kind of training that builds character. Martial arts isn't for people without a solid foundation. Exactly, Jake agreed firmly. Not everyone's built to understand respect. And the conversation went on, with Jake carefully painting himself as the patient mentor, while the two black boys became textbook examples of the ones who just don't belong. Both parents nodded in agreement, satisfied, as if their biases had been neatly validated by their son's words. To them, discipline meant fitting the mold, and difference was always something to be corrected. Back in the Thompson garage, sweat streamed down Marcus and Michael's faces as the session reached its most intense phase. David wasn't teaching individual strikes anymore. He was running full combinations, counter scenarios, and drills on reading an opponent's movement in a real space. They're going to use size and that black belt to intimidate you, he said, while circling the boy's eyes sharp as a hawk's. But strength means nothing if you're faster and more committed. He demonstrated a sequence: close the gap, strike the weak point, create distance, nothing flashy, no performance flair, just cold efficiency. The kind of combat training that once kept him alive overseas. This isn't about becoming better martial artists than them, David said plainly. It's about becoming better fighters, and between those two things is a world of difference. Marcus unleashed a rapid flurry of punches into the mid. The final strike landed with a thud, like it shattered the helplessness he'd carried for 8 long weeks. That's it, David encouraged. Now add the knee. Don't give him time to recover. Michael, the more analytical of the two, began seeing the tactical logic in every move. His bottled-up anger now became fuel. Each strike a silent declaration, I won't be broken again. When the session ended, David pulled off his gloves and looked his sons in the eye. Remember, everything we learn in here stays here. At the dojo, you act like nothing's changed. How long do we keep pretending? Marcus asked. David smiled, a blade-sharp grin. Until the moment's right, trust me, it's coming. The next evening, the dojo lights were back on. The twins walked in like they always did. Yellow belts, humble posture, quiet steps, shoulders drawn in. But something had changed. The attitude, the eyes, the way they moved. Connor's kick came as expected. So did Jake's accidental hook to the ribs. But this time, the boys didn't stumble. They blocked. They absorbed. They looked their attackers in the eye and didn't flinch. You're getting better at taking hits, Connor said after a round. Maybe you're finally learning your place here. Marcus didn't answer, but in his eyes burned a quiet promise. I know exactly where I belong, and it's not under your feet. He stared straight at Jake, no longer dodging eye contact, no longer afraid. We're learning a lot, he said, voice calm, but loaded with meaning. Jake frowned. A strange sensation crept into his chest, a flicker of unease. Not fear, but something close enough to make him notice. During the water break, he leaned over to Connor and muttered, Those kids, they're acting different tonight, not snapping like they used to. They're probably close to quitting, Connor shrugged, smug. Finally figured out they don't belong. But quitting was the last thing on Marcus and Michael's minds. Even as they endured the same disguised beatings, the twins were quietly studying. No longer just defending, they were analyzing. Every habit, every blind spot, the way Jake rotated his hips when striking, how Connor always left his left flank slightly exposed. These weren't just techniques, they were opportunities. Meanwhile, in the back office of the dojo, Sensei Mitchell was feeling the weight of David Thompson's warning hanging over him like a storm cloud. Money was always tight. Students like Jake and Connor, sons of the dojo's biggest sponsors, were the lifeblood of the business. Making changes meant risking losses. You two need to be more careful when training with the Thompson boys, Mitchell said, pulling them aside after class, lowering his voice. Jake raised an eyebrow. Is something wrong? Their dad's been asking questions. Nothing serious, but we should be more mindful. If anyone's watching, everything needs to look like a regular training session. Connor caught the implication instantly. He smirked. So, keep going, just be subtle? Mitchell didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said it all. This was a new game, and Jake and Connor had always thrived under shady rules. On the walk home, Michael whispered when it was just the two of them, "They're being careful now." "Good," Marcus replied. "Careful means predictable, and predictable means we can plan better." That night, the Thompson garage became a forge again. No more basics. David focused on counters to specific techniques. The boys described in detail. "They still think you're just yellow belts," he said, holding the mitts for Marcus. "But when the moment comes, you'll hit like soldiers." The drills were designed to neutralize strength and technique through speed, angles, and surprise. They didn't need to be stronger, just smarter, quicker, more decisive. "This isn't about becoming better martial artists," David said, eyes sharp as steel. "It's about becoming real fighters. And that difference is what's going to save you." Marcus' uppercut landed on the mitt with a crack that echoed through the garage like thunder. For the first time in almost 2 months, he didn't feel like a victim. Michael wasn't far behind. His strategic mind fused with months of bottled rage, producing a precision that was exactly what David had hoped for. Every punch wasn't just a strike. It was a message. "I'm not who I was." Before wrapping up, David looked them both in the eye. "Everything you learned tonight, don't let anyone outside this house know. Let them keep thinking you're prey." "Where do we stop pretending?" Marcus asked. David smiled, but his eyes were cold, certain. "When the time comes, and it's coming soon, predators don't react, they wait. They study. They strike at the precise moment." For 4 straight weeks, the Thompson garage had become a lab for that strategy. The heavy bag was pocked with dents from countless strike combinations. The concrete floor scuffed with the marks of endless footwork drills. Movements once taught had become instinct. "Tomorrow's the last day to register for the tournament," David said, setting down a local martial arts magazine, the cover advertising the Tri-County Open. "Are you ready to decide?" Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, his breathing steady despite the intensity of their last training session. A month of working with his father hadn't just made his muscles sharper, it had given him a new kind of confidence. "We're ready," he answered without hesitation. Michael, as always, was more reflective. He held the tournament flyer, eyes fixed on the details. "Dad, it says they divide competitors by belt rank. We'd be matched with other yellow belts, unless you choose the open division," David replied, his tone carrying a weight that made both boys look up. "The open division is for everyone, regardless of belt, including black belts," Marcus murmured, the idea sparking in his gaze. "Including Jake and Connor," Michael added. David nodded. "The question is, are you ready not just to defend yourselves, but to show everyone what you've really learned?" The garage fell silent. Only the soft creak of the hanging heavy bag filled the night air. This wasn't just the next step. It was a turning point. A decision they couldn't walk back. "If we do this, there's no going back," Michael whispered. "Win or lose, everyone will know. We're not just the new kids at the dojo anymore." "Are you still those kids?" David asked. Marcus clenched his fists, remembering those early humiliating days when every effort felt useless. Every class ended in pain. "No, not anymore." But then Michael asked the hard question, "What if we lose? Can 4 weeks really beat people who've trained for years?" David's smile held a proud harshness. "Son, they've trained in karate for years. But you've been learning how to fight. Those are 2 very different things." That night, in the dim bedroom light, the twins lay facing each other, restless with everything that had been set in motion. "Something about this feels off," Michael said quietly. "Keeping secrets, training in the dark, planning to strike back." Isn't that revenge? What's wrong is letting them think they can treat us that way forever, Marcus answered. What's wrong is a system that protects bullies because their parents fund the dojo. Michael still hesitated. What if we hurt them at the tournament? Marcus cut in. If we're defending ourselves, that's not revenge. That's freedom. Still, Michael couldn't quiet the storm inside. Are we learning to defend ourselves, or are we being trained to become weapons? He whispered into the dark. Marcus turned to him, eyes sharp beneath the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Maybe that's exactly what we're becoming, and maybe that's what we have to be to survive. That conversation exposed the deep contradictions inside two boys still just 14 years old. After a month of secret training, they had gained strength, but a bigger question loomed. Would they lose themselves just to fight back against injustice? Meanwhile, in the room next door, their father, David, lay motionless, eyes on the ceiling, mind spinning. He had once taught his sons about honor, integrity, and solving problems with reason. But now, he was giving them the lessons of war, the skills he had used to survive. Was it right? Or was he betraying the very principles he once lived by? The following night, in the garage, the three Thompsons stood in a silent circle. David broke the stillness. The tournament's in 3 weeks. If you want in, I have to register you tomorrow. After that, there's no turning back. You mean no turning back from the tournament? Michael asked carefully. Or from everything else that comes with it? David looked his son in the eye. Once you step onto that mat and show everyone who you really are, everything changes. Not just at the dojo, but in this community. Marcus nodded. Good. I'm tired of pretending we're okay with it. It's time they knew who we really are. Michael looked at Marcus, his twin, the one who had survived every painful training session with him. He knew he couldn't turn around now. All right, let's do it. David smiled, a proud smile, but one weighed with deep concern. Then tomorrow, I'll sign you both up for the Open Division at the Tri-County Open, and for the next 3 weeks, we turn you into real warriors. That night, the Thompsons entered their training session with a new mindset, no longer the targets, but young men choosing to walk into battle. There would be no retreat. On tournament day, the Millbrook Community Center buzzed with tension. Colorful banners from various dojos lined the walls. The polished wooden floor was divided into several rings, battlegrounds for the fierce competition to come. Marcus and Michael sat quietly in a row of chairs near the registration table. Their white gis and yellow belts stood out among the higher-ranked students warming up nearby. Thompson, Marcus and Michael, the tournament coordinator called out. You boys want to register in the yellow belt division, right? That would match your rank. We're registering for the open division, Marcus replied, eyes steady. There was nothing left of the timid boy he used to be. Behind them, David stood silently watching. Across the gym, Jake Harrison and Connor Mills were warming up with other members of the Warriors Path dojo. They looked as confident as ever, unaware that the storm they once mocked was now heading straight for them. Marcus and Michael stepped onto the mat like silent warriors. Jake and Connor, both wearing black belts, were laughing and relaxed, occasionally casting glances toward the Thompsons. Well, look who showed up, Connor said loud enough for the entire warm-up area to hear. This should be fun. Jake smirked, a sneer curling his lip. Almost feel bad for them. Almost. Sensei Mitchell appeared just as the tension started to thicken. He spotted David and frowned. I wasn't told your sons would be competing today, David replied curtly. There's a lot you weren't told. Ring 3, Open Division, first match, Connor Mills versus Michael Thompson. The announcer's voice echoed across the venue. The Warriors Path section fell into tense silence. Some parents exchanged knowing glances. They expected a quick lesson from a black belt to an outclassed kid. Michael stepped onto the mat. His yellow belt was a quiet, defiant statement. The crowd murmured. Connor followed, walking with a swagger that bordered on arrogance. Bow to your opponent, the referee signaled. Michael bowed respectfully. Connor gave a lazy nod. smirking all the while. "Ready? Begin." Connor lunged with a barrage of aggressive attacks. He planned to end the match in seconds, like he always did with weaker opponents. But his first kick struck nothing but air. Michael sidestepped with stunning speed, then countered like lightning. A punch to the midsection made Connor buckle, and before he could recover, a sharp knee to the ribs followed. "Point for Thompson," the referee called. Connor froze, face pale. This couldn't be happening. A yellow belt had just scored decisively on a black belt? He charged again, this time less tactical and more desperate. Michael parried every blow cleanly, then unleashed a counter-strike. A body hook followed by a reverse punch to the jaw. Connor staggered back, blood trickling from his nose. "Point for Thompson. Match over. Winner, Michael Thompson." Connor stood there, stunned. His face shifted from shock to shame, then ignited into rage. "No way. He's just a yellow belt." At that moment, the loudspeaker rang out again. "Ring 2, open division. Jake Harrison vs. Marcus Thompson." Jake swallowed hard. His friend's humiliating loss still hung in the air. He stepped onto the mat stiffly, hiding his fear beneath bravado. "I've been training since I was 8. I'm not losing today." Marcus stepped forward, eyes calm. "Good for you." The match began. Jake threw everything he had, years of polished technique. But this time, nothing landed. Marcus moved like water, struck like forged steel. His attacks weren't flashy or theatrical. They were sharp, precise, unforgiving. Step by step, the Thompson brothers weren't just reclaiming their dignity. They were forcing the dojo and the entire audience to confront a new reality. Who really embodied the spirit of martial arts? Who truly understood its values? Jake lay on the mat for several seconds, body trembling with frustration and shame. When the referee raised Marcus's hand, the entire gym erupted, not in surprise, but in the undeniable realization of what had just unfolded. In the Warriors' Path section, the crowd's murmurs turned chaotic. "Richard Harrison." Jake's father shoved his chair aside and stood up, face burning red. "This is fraud. They're not yellow belts. They're trained fighters in disguise." "Bill Mills," Connor's father, stormed over, pointing at the referee. "They've been hiding their real skill. This is cheating. We demand an investigation." Sensei Mitchell rushed over, trying to keep composure, though his voice cracked under pressure. "This can't be. 2 months ago they couldn't block a basic strike. Who trained them?" The fury spilled into accusations. "They're hired ringers," Richard yelled. "I want the results thrown out. No yellow belt fights like that." But the tournament official, an older man who'd overseen hundreds of matches over the years, simply nodded calmly. "I have the official registration records from their dojo. Their yellow belt status is valid. If there's an issue, it's with whoever awarded that rank." The two fathers were left speechless. Neither expected the blade of accountability to turn back toward their own dojo. Meanwhile, Connor and Jake slumped near the competition area, their faces pale, eyes red. Every gaze from friends, parents, and fellow students was now fixed on them, not with admiration, but with doubt and disappointment. "They humiliated us. In front of everyone," Jake muttered. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles bled. "And I cheated? No way, they just yellow belts," Connor growled, his glare burning toward Marcus and Michael. Right then, David Thompson stepped forward. His expression wasn't angry, just a smile, calm and cold as ice. "Mr. Harrison? Mr. Mills? I hear you're calling for an investigation into my sons?" The two men turned. The air thickened, heavy with tension. David continued, his voice low and deliberate. "We didn't cheat. We just stopped being silent. And if you think it's unfair that your sons got beaten in front of everyone, maybe ask yourselves, why did 2 yellow belts have to learn how to fight outside of a dojo?" Silence fell like a blade. David stepped into the growing crowd, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp enough to cut steel. "What exactly is the issue here?" Richard Harrison spoke through gritted teeth, pointing directly at the Thompson boys. "Your kids are frauds. They can't be yellow belts. This whole thing is a setup. David smiled faintly and replied, They earned their yellow belts at your dojo 2 months ago, in front of your own instructors. Bill Mills cut in, his voice sharp and bitter. Then someone trained them off the record. No beginner fights like that. Or maybe your sons just aren't as good as you thought they were, David replied softly. But each word hit like a slap to their pride. The line landed like a punch. Both Richard and Bill stepped back, faces red with rage and shame. We know what we saw, Richard hissed. They embarrassed our sons in public, made them look like fools. Maybe. Because they are fools, Marcus chimed in, stepping up beside his father. His voice was quiet but razor-sharp. Jake Harrison's eyes blazed as he let out a guttural growl and lunged at Marcus in fury. But tournament security jumped in just in time, holding both sides back. That's enough, the head organizer shouted. The matches were fair, the results stand. The Thompson family began making their way toward the exit, holding their certificates of victory. But the atmosphere remained electric with tension. Jake and Connor weren't going to let it end like that. As the Thompsons neared the exit, Jake and Connor broke away from their parents, faces twisted with rage and humiliation. Hey, Jake shouted. Marcus and Michael turned around, still riding the high of victory, unaware that danger was closing in. You think you're hot stuff now, huh? Connor growled, stepping closer. Think you're better than us? We don't think, we just proved it, Marcus replied, calm and confident. That self-assurance was the final spark that sent the two sore losers over the edge. Connor suddenly threw a punch at Michael's head. Jake lunged at Marcus like a wild animal. Both strikes were cheap shots. Outside the rules, outside the ring. Shouts rang out across the gym as the crowd realized what was happening. Michael and Marcus were knocked down, caught completely off guard. But seconds later, their training kicked in like instinct. Marcus rolled, dodging Jake's follow-up punch, and sprang to his feet in a fighting stance. Michael took the first hit from Connor, then responded with a powerful hook to the jaw that stunned him backward. What had seemed finished exploded once more, this time with no rules, no referee. Just survival instincts and a burning need for justice. Marcus no longer moved like a tournament fighter. He unleashed a fury no one had seen before. You want a real fight? Then come get it, he roared, eyes ablaze. There were no formal karate stances now, only raw street fighting, every blow fueled by weeks of pain and rage. Marcus delivered a brutal hook that split Jake's lip wide open, blood gushing from his nose. Meanwhile, Michael, applying the precision techniques their father had taught, struck with the finesse of a scalpel, dismantling every wild swing Connor threw. Stop it! That's enough! The tournament director's voice rang out, but it was lost in the chaos. Spectators backed away, gasping as the brawl erupted in the center of the gym like wildfire. Jake tried to charge again, but Marcus sidestepped effortlessly and slammed a knee into his ribs, folding him in half. Connor swung blindly, only to be caught with a vicious spinning punch that sent him crashing into a row of folding chairs. Security guards rushed in, grabbing all four of them and pulling them out of the brawl. Jake and Connor's faces were smeared with blood, their black belts disheveled and stained crimson. The Thompson brothers, though breathing heavily, stood their ground, cold-eyed and unshaken. What the hell is going on here? The tournament director barked, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. They ambushed us, Michael said, wiping blood from his split lip. We were just trying to leave. That's a lie, Jake shouted, voice nasal and muffled from his broken nose. They've been provoking us all day. Provoking you by beating you fair and square? Marcus cut in. David Thompson pushed through the crowd, his gaze burning with intensity. He quickly looked over his sons, the silent concern in his eyes shifting rapidly to a quiet fury. You boys okay? He asked, resting a hand gently on Marcus's shoulder. We're good, Dad. Better than they are, Marcus replied, eyes still locked on Jake. Richard Harrison and Bill Mills arrived, their faces a mixture of worry and outrage. Their sons looked like they'd just been spat out of a meat grinder, battered, humiliated, and stripped of pride. This was an assault, Richard shouted, pointing directly at the Thompson brothers. "After your sons jumped mine in front of 100 people?" David replied, his voice calm but sharp as ice. The tournament director huddled briefly with the security team and referees. The discussion took only seconds, but the outcome was irreversible. Jake Harrison and Connor Mills are disqualified from the tournament and banned from all future regional events. Post-match assault is absolutely unacceptable. "Who are these pills?" Mills roared, jabbing a finger at the Thompsons. They defended themselves, fought off a surprise attack. Not only is that legal, it was necessary in the situation, the director replied crisply, without a hint of doubt. The statement hit the Warriors Path dojo like a bolt of lightning. Their star students weren't just defeated, they were banned, humiliated, and erased from the competitive scene before the entire local martial arts community. "This is outrageous," Sensei Mitchell shot to his feet, face flushed with fury. "There's got to be some mistake." "There is no mistake," the director replied coldly. "The only mistake was letting your students represent your school." Medical staff arrived to assess the injured fighters. The damage was obvious. Jake had a broken nose, a torn lip, and visible bruising around his ribs. Connor's eye was swollen shut, his face covered in scrapes, and his left arm hung limp. Both needed to be taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, Marcus and Michael, despite enduring a brutal ambush, suffered only minor scrapes. David's quiet, disciplined training had prepared them not just for fair competition, but for fights where no rules applied. "We should sue," Richard Harrison told his wife, voice cracking with rage. "That was a deliberate attack. Our boys were just walking out." David stepped in, his tone icy calm. "Good luck with that." As the Harrison and Mills families retreated to a corner, whispering in panic and desperately trying to make sense of the total collapse of their sons' martial arts futures, the truth stood unshakable. The black belts had fallen, not just in the ring, but in the eyes of everyone watching. The tournament ban would follow Jake and Connor through the rest of their teenage years, ending any dream of a professional fighting career. A silent, enduring social sentence. "This isn't over," Richard growled, staring David down. "I swear it is for your sons," David replied, eyes locked on his. "They made their choice when they jumped mine." The Thompson family packed up their gear while the stands buzzed with murmurs. The story of 2 gold belts defeating black belts and bringing down a well-established dojo would spread across the martial arts community before sunrise. "Dad, when we were leaving, they looked really pissed," Michael whispered, concern in his voice. "People hate having their illusions shattered, son," David said, his voice like dry wood catching fire, especially the ones about their own kids' greatness. "What do you think they'll do next?" Marcus asked. David paused, his eyes scanning through possible tactics and scenarios. "Probably nothing smart. Angry people rarely make wise choices." The ride home should have been full of triumph. Instead, the Thompsons sat in thoughtful silence. They knew this was only the beginning. Once home, the brothers cleaned their minor wounds while David locked every door and activated the security system. You could call it paranoia or survival instinct. But one thing was clear. Those who lose with dishonor often try to win in the shadows. Meanwhile, across town, 2 cars carried angry parents and bruised egos, muttering dangerous words in the dark. The Harrison and Mills families had spent years feeding the belief that their sons were exceptional, that their dojo was elite, and that their social standing was untouchable. All of those illusions shattered in a single afternoon by 2 boys they had once dismissed as just gold belts. What would be the rational response? Accept defeat, learn the lesson, and move on. But rationality requires reasonable people, and those gathered in the Harrison living room that night were anything but. "This can't be how it ends," Richard Harrison muttered as he paced across the expensive rug, the living room gleaming like a luxury showroom. "Our sons were humiliated, banned, destroyed in front of everyone. The Billy cheated or something," Connor mumbled through swollen lips. "No way a gold belt can fight like that." "Exactly," Bill Mills nodded, his voice sharp with resentment. "Something's wrong here. and it needs to be made right. As the night wore on, the anger in the room began to congeal, not just frustration anymore, but a plan. A dark, simple, and dangerous plan. Follow the Thompsons home and have a private conversation about respect and consequences. By 10 p.m., 2 cars sat silently at the end of the Thompson street, lights off, engines cold. Inside, whispered voices sketched out scenarios of revenge. The Thompson home glowed in quiet warmth, dishes clinking in the kitchen, homework half finished on the table, and every door locked tight. At exactly 10:47, the doorbell rang. "Who would come by this late?" Lisa Thompson asked, still drying a dish. David glanced through the curtained slit. His expression hardened instantly. "Take the boys upstairs. Lock the door." "What's going on?" Lisa asked, sensing a shift in his posture. "Nothing I can't handle, just do it." The bell rang again, this time faster. Then came pounding on the door, shaking the whole house. David opened the door just a crack, with the security chain still in place. Under the porch light, Richard Harrison and Bill Mills stood stiffly, still in the same clothes from earlier, their faces tight with tension. "It's late," David said, voice calm and hard as steel. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," Richard said, anger barely contained. "About what your son did to mine." "You mean about your son attacking mine from behind after losing a fair match?" David replied, gaze unwavering. "What else is there to say?" "Come on, Thompson." Bill stepped forward. "We didn't come all this way to talk through a crack in the door. And I don't open my door to uninvited strangers at nearly 11 p.m., especially ones showing up like this," David said, starting to close it. Richard suddenly shoved his shoulder into the gap holding the door. "Do you know how much money we've put into our boys?" Richard growled. 7 years of training, tournaments, camps, gear, thousands of dollars. And your son destroyed all that in one damn afternoon. What did all that money buy you? Besides a couple of overindulged brats," David shot back. "Not my problem." "Jake was being scouted by colleges," Bill shouted. "Full ride scholarships on the table. Now he's banned until he's 18, and he should have thought twice before jumping my son from behind." "Your kids are the ones who should have been banned," Richard roared, jabbing a finger toward the house. "They cheated. No gold belt fights like that." "My sons won fair and square," David replied, voice low but unyielding. "Yours earned disgrace for failing at fighting and at being decent human beings." Their expressions shifted instantly, from rage to confusion, then back to fury. They weren't used to being challenged, not used to being knocked off the pedestals they'd built for themselves. "We want financial compensation," Bill said suddenly, "for the damage your sons did to our kids' futures." David laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. "Compensation? For teaching your boys that bullying has consequences? For popping the bubble you spent years inflating? Their futures were wrecked the moment they chose to go after my sons. I just sped up the process." "Cut the moral high ground crap," Richard barked, slamming a shoulder into the still-cracked door. "Open up. Let's settle this like men." "We are settling it," David said, stepping back, eyes cold as iron. "And that means I'm asking you to get off my property before I call the cops." "Please, Bill Mills snapped, shouting. "We'll tell them about your illegal training, about how you've turned your kids into living weapons." "Go ahead," David said, stepping fully onto the porch and closing the door behind him. "I'll tell them about the months of racial slurs, insults, and threats your sons made against mine. Let's see whose story they believe." Richard and Bill quickly spread out, flanking him in a clear attempt to intimidate. "You think you're tough because you were in the military?" Richard sneered. "Think that makes you better than us? I don't think." "I know," David replied. "I raised better sons than you ever could." "My son's a champion," Bill barked. "He trained his whole life to earn that title." "And got beat by 2 gold belts," David said, voice like a hammer, "because he was arrogant, because he thought others were beneath him." Each word hit like a blade, cutting deep into the already fractured egos of the 2 men. Their faces turned red, fists clenched so tightly they looked ready to snap. "You ruined them," Richard growled, voice low and dangerous like a predator's snarl. "Years of training, college scholarships, gone. All because you didn't teach your boys to know their place." "Their place?" David narrowed his eyes. "And where exactly do you think that is?" "You know damned well where," Bill said, stepping closer. The racism, once veiled, was now laid bare, raw, unfiltered, and venomous. David's posture tensed. Two opponents, untrained, undisciplined, emotional. His mind mapped out each possible scenario, the way a soldier scans a battlefield. "Last warning," David said, voice low but thunderous. "Leave! We're not going anywhere!" Richard roared and threw a punch. David slipped to the side with the speed of someone who'd survived war zones. He countered immediately. A precise strike to the gut that dropped Richard like a felled tree. Bill lunged, swinging wildly. David grabbed his wrist, spun, and tossed him into the porch railing like a sack of grain. "Stay down," he ordered. But the two men scrambled to their feet again, pride outweighing pain. The fight was short, but it made one thing clear. This was a man who'd been through real battles, and they were just two suburban blowhards high on misplaced self-importance. Richard managed to land a weak punch on David's shoulder, but it only earned him a flurry of retaliatory blows. His nose shattered, his lip torn, blood splattered across the porch tiles. Bill fared even worse, face down on the wooden floor, back pinned by David's knee. "Done yet?" David asked, breath heavy, eyes sharp and composed. The two men groaned in pain, too beaten to go on, yet their eyes still burned with undying resentment. "This isn't over," Richard wheezed, blood running down the collar of his expensive dress shirt. "It is for me," David said, rising and releasing Bill. "Your sons are banned, your money's wasted, and now you know what happens when you bring your hate to my doorstep." Sirens howled through the night. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, flashing across Maple Street like blades slicing through the tension. Police cruiser pulled up outside the Thompsons' home, its lights sweeping across the windows, casting fractured colors on the quiet neighborhood. Officer Martinez stepped out first, her hand resting lightly on her holstered weapon, eyes scanning the scene. Two injured men, one man still standing, calm, steady, hands in plain sight. She tilted her head, voice firm. "We received a disturbance report." "I called," David said, his tone deep and steady, though adrenaline still surged beneath his skin. "They came to my house, close to 11 p.m., uninvited. I told them to leave. They attacked me?" "That's not true," Richard shouted, stumbling upright, clutching his bleeding nose. "He assaulted us. We just came to talk." Martinez looked at all three of them with seasoned eyes. David stood tall, shirt only slightly wrinkled, no blood on his hands. The other two looked like they'd been through a blender. "What's your name?" she asked. "David Thompson, this is my house. These men are Richard Harrison and Bill Mills. They showed up, refused to leave when asked, and then got physical." "We have a right to confront him," Bill hissed. "His kids ruined our sons' futures today. Years of training, thousands of dollars, gone. All because of those punks." "What exactly did they do?" Martinez asked, pulling out her notebook. "They attacked my son in the middle of a karate tournament," Richard shouted. "In front of hundreds of people." David let out a dry laugh. "My sons won fair and square. Then yours jumped them from behind. It's all on camera. Want to see it?" Meanwhile, the second officer, Johnson, was speaking with neighbors, many of whom had come outside after hearing the yelling. Several had even recorded the latter part of the fight from their windows. Officer Johnson returned to the group, bringing new information. Neighbors confirmed hearing the argument. Mrs. Patterson across the street said she clearly saw these two men push the door while the homeowner was trying to close it. David nodded slightly, his tone calm but firm. "They trespassed. I asked them to leave multiple times. When they refused and got violent, I defended myself." "Defended yourself?" Richard yelled, face flushed and blood still dripping from his nose. "Look at us. Look what he did." Officer Martinez glanced between the three. One man stood tall and composed, the other two. bruised, disheveled, blood-streaked. She tilted her head and asked, "Do you have military or law enforcement experience?" 8 years in the Army. 2 combat tours, David replied crisply. Martinez gave a small nod, now understanding why the fight had been so one-sided. 2 angry civilians with no control or skill were no match for someone shaped by battlefield experience. "Here's my decision," she declared. "Mr. Harrison and Mr. Mills will be cited for trespassing and disturbing the peace." "Cited?" Bill Mills snapped. "He beat the crap out of us. You came to his house close to midnight, refused to leave when asked. That's trespassing under Texas law, and if you keep escalating, I'll add harassment." Richard clutched his nose, his face pale with a mix of fury and shame. "My son got banned from competing because of his kids. 7 years of training, college scholarships, ruined. And we're the ones getting punished. Your son was banned for assaulting his opponent after a match. That's a decision by the Martial Arts Federation, not the law," Martinez replied firmly. "Unless you want me to add false reporting to the charges?" Silence fell like ice. The 2 men had nothing left to say. They came for payback and left with citations and the sting of public humiliation. Upstairs, Marcus and Michael silently watched from behind the window, eyes tense. Their mother, worried but composed, had allowed them to witness the conclusion of a chain of events they had unintentionally set in motion. "Dad's okay," Marcus whispered, his voice as soft as a breeze. Eyes locked on the scene below, his father speaking calmly to police under the flashing red and blue lights. "Not just okay," Michael murmured, smiling slightly as the patrol cars began to pull away. "He's awesome. Looks like those other dads just got the same lesson their sons learned." From the doorway, Lisa Thompson watched quietly. As a nurse, she was no stranger to blood and injuries. But what moved her now was the way her husband, a former soldier, had handled everything with chilling calm and precision. "Your father always knows how to solve problems," she said softly. Outside, the officers finished their paperwork and guided the 2 battered men into the back seats of the squad cars. Under the pale yellow street lamp, the image was a perfect illustration of bitter defeat. Men who had once swaggered with arrogance, now reduced to the broken fragments of their pride. "Mr. Thompson?" Officer Martinez approached David, her tone serious. "You handled everything by the book tonight. Still, I'd recommend installing more security cameras and adjusting your routines a bit. People like this don't let things go easily." "I've already planned for that. Thank you for getting here when you did," David replied evenly. She nodded. "And your son did well today. Sometimes bullies need to learn the hard way. Actions have consequences." As the patrol cars rolled down the quiet street, David stood on the porch, watching them fade into the distance. The confrontation he had fully expected was over, and this time he had ended it. His sons stepped out onto the porch, visible relief washing over their faces. "Is it over, Dad?" Michael asked, adrenaline still lingering in his voice. David looked at them not as boys, but as young men who had stood their ground, fought back, and defended themselves. "It's over," he said firmly. "Now the whole city knows you're not victims, and we're a family that doesn't get pushed around. Most importantly, they've all learned one thing: actions have consequences." Marcus nodded, his eyes gleaming with a clarity no martial arts lesson could ever teach. "We didn't start the fight, but we always finish it." "Exactly," David replied, his gaze firm. "But never go looking for trouble. Tonight, trouble came looking for us." They stepped inside together. Behind them, the neighborhood returned to its peaceful quiet. But inside each of them lingered the echoes of a night they'd never forget. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, new security installations, and meetings with school officials and tournament organizers. But tonight, they were safe, they were stronger, and the 2 boys once underestimated had truly grown up. 6 weeks after the fateful tournament, Warriors Path Dojo was as silent as a graveyard. In the empty training hall, Sensei Robert Mitchell quietly packed items into cardboard boxes. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the last black belt. Years of dedication and hard work, now wrapped in tissue paper. 30 families canceled their memberships in just 2 weeks, he murmured, voice choking. 15 years of building, undone in a single afternoon. The investigation by the Regional Martial Arts Association was swift and unforgiving. They gathered statements from parents, students, and tournament witnesses, unveiling a grim picture of a dojo that tolerated bullying and where the master's integrity had been sold for the favor of wealthy parents. The result? Teaching license revoked, membership permanently suspended. Every door slammed shut on Mitchell. Without Richard Harrison and Bill Mills, the former Diamond sponsors. And following intense public backlash, the dojo could no longer afford its lease. The building's owner, though sympathetic, couldn't justify keeping a business that had become a PR disaster. Elsewhere in town, the newly opened Integrity Martial Arts Academy was buzzing with laughter. On the training mat, Marcus and Michael Thompson were guiding a group of young beginners. Remember, martial arts isn't for hurting people weaker than you, Marcus reminded a white belt struggling to block a strike. It's for protecting yourself and others. Exactly, nodded Master Chen, a former Marine and the dojo's founder. Strength is for protection, not domination. Under Master Chen's disciplined mentorship, the Thompson brothers had progressed quickly, earning their orange belts in just 1 month. But more importantly, they'd become known as the big brothers of the dojo, ideal role models for younger students. I heard Jake Harrison's working at his dad's insurance office now, Michael said quietly during a water break. And Connor's doing online school, too scared to return to campus. That might be a good thing, Marcus replied softly, without a trace of resentment. Maybe they'll learn something useful from all this. The tournament's impact went beyond the martial arts world. After news broke about the attempted intimidation at the Thompsons' house, Richard Harrison lost several clients from his insurance agency. Bill Mills, who had been up for a promotion at his law firm, had his advancement postponed indefinitely due to the scandal. At Millbrook High, the story became legend. The 2 boys who were once dismissed were now spoken of as the system breakers, the twins who took down black belts with truth and honor. On the drive home from their new dojo, Michael whispered to his brother, "It's weird, being famous for a fight." Marcus laughed. Better than being famous for getting beat up. At home, David Thompson was installing the final security camera in the backyard. Though the Harrison and Mills families had retreated into silence, shamed and entangled in legal trouble, he didn't let his guard down. Caution was second nature to someone shaped by combat. "How was practice?" he asked, as his sons came in through the garage. "Great, Dad. Master Chen said we might make green belt by Christmas," Michael said excitedly. "And we helped 3 new kids with the basics," Marcus added. "No one gets bullied in this dojo." David nodded in approval. A painful journey had turned 2 former victims into protectors. During dinner, a knock came at the door. A sound that once brought tension, now a sign of something good. Standing outside was Master Chencom, calm and proud, holding a thick envelope and a gleam in his eyes. "I wanted to deliver this in person," he said, handing it to David. "Marcus and Michael's orange belt certificates. And something extra." Inside was a letter from the State Martial Arts Association, nominating the twins for a youth instructor training program focused on bullying prevention. "They heard your story," Master Chen explained, "and they want your sons to share their experience with other dojos, to help prevent what happened at Warrior's Path from happening again." The brothers looked at each other, no words needed. They understood this was bigger than any belt. From victims, they had become leaders, reshaping the culture of martial arts statewide. "We're honored," Michael said, speaking for them both. Later that night, gathered in the living room, David asked, "Are you proud of what you've done?" "We're proud we didn't give up," Marcus replied with certainty. "Proud we prove we belong wherever we choose to be," Michael added. "And proud we can help other kids avoid what we went through," they said in unison, like 2 perfect harmonies. The town of Millbrook slept peacefully, but what was once considered unchangeable had shifted forever. The bullies were exposed and toppled. A corrupt dojo had fallen, and two once overlooked boys were now symbols of justice, courage, and leadership. You see, justice doesn't always come from courtrooms or laws. Sometimes it comes faster, stronger, from ordinary people, brave enough to stand up and say, power doesn't belong to abusers. It belongs to those who know how to use it right. Have you ever witnessed or lived through a moment where justice was served through the courage of everyday people? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed the journey of the Thompson brothers, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. And now I've picked 2 videos I think you'll love. Click to watch and keep the momentum going. Wishing you a day full of strength and purpose.